The Supreme Court had 3 historic rulings this weekend and everybody's talking about them, but few people are talking about how they will directly influence and affect your life, and that is what we are doing today because they have massive implications. When breaking down the 3 Supreme Court rulings this weekend, there is something huge that almost nobody is talking about. It is so big that it could actually allow Trump to ban abortion nationwide without any legislation. That's what I want to talk about. I want to talk about how that could actually get done. It has to do with the ruling that ended district court injunctions. So that was Trump versus Casa Inc. Essentially, what was happening was, this has been in the news for the last few months. Basically, Trump would sign some sort of executive order, and then one of the 94 district judges in the United States would block it. They would just, even though it's a district court, they would say, nope, can't happen nationwide. And they weren't circuit judges. Again, they're not Supreme Court justices. They're just a random district court. In fact, this happened 40 times, and out of the 40, 35 of them came from 5 liberal judges. Again, 5 out of 94. So this wasn't like 94 judges all doing it here or there. It was 5 activist judges that did this 35 times. And we all knew this was crazy. So did the Supreme Court. So they ruled that it was BS and it couldn't happen. So that's all important. Now, this is where things get really interesting because that is kind of a blanket thing, but this is what could actually affect your life. One of the executive orders that was blocked was Trump's executive order that ended birthright citizenship, meaning that you cannot just be an illegal immigrant, come over to the border, have a kid, and have that kid be a legal citizen. That's how it's worked for the last literally couple centuries since the 14th Amendment was passed. In order to have citizenship under that executive order that Trump wanted to sign, you need at least one of your parents to already be a U.S. citizen. Democrats didn't like this, obviously, because their whole thing is trying to import as many illegal immigrants as possible and have their kids grow up and become Democrats. And so they went through a district court judge to block it, and now that has basically been smacked down. So now that executive order can happen. So the question is, how can Democrats fight that? Because they're still going to fight it. And the answer is that they can fight it through class action lawsuits. We all know what this is. A class action is like a big widespread lawsuit. Sometimes you don't even join in. Like sometimes you can just be sent money because you're part of this class. And then, a prosecutor on your behalf essentially has fought something and gotten money from you. I'm not a lawyer, but I'm not an expert on this, but I want to break down how this could affect abortion. So essentially, a prosecutor will need then to prove that there's a group that is being equally harmed by something and that group can reasonably be lumped together. So so that's how Democrats can litigate this, essentially. They can go and sue the Trump administration to get this broken down, but it has to be done through a class action lawsuit. So again, in a birthright citizenship case, what would the class be? What would the group be? It would be an unborn baby, right? Because again, the central argument is that baby has a right to citizenship before it is even born. And so this is something that Democrat prosecutors fighting Trump's ending of birthright citizenship might have to do, because essentially their argument would be this, that so they would also have to prove that the 14th Amendment says that birthright citizenship is a thing. However, they would also have to argue that an unborn baby is a class in the class action lawsuit. And I actually think that they would probably have a fairly good case for that, because you can see very clearly, all unborn babies would be harmed proportionately because of that. So it wouldn't be hard to establish that in my opinion. A class cannot be made up of non-existent people, right? It has to be an actual concrete group. Unborn babies are a concrete group. It has to be made up of living people. Therefore, if Democrats fight Trump's executive order, they will have to argue that the unborn are living people who have rights, which of course is the whole pro-life movement. That is all the pro-life movement is trying to establish. And of course, the right to life is the most fundamental right of them all. It is the very, very first one. So there are really only 2 options for Democrats at this point. Either birthright citizenship is over because they realize this and they realize they just can't litigate this. That's probably what Donald Trump wants. Or Democrats go through a judicial process and determine that the unborn are living people who have rights. Either way is pretty fantastic. I mean, that's astounding, by the way. That is a crazy turn of events. I think, the pro-life is much better than ending birthright citizenship. Clearly. And by the way, if there's conservatives arguing against that, let me suggest that they're not conservatives. There's nothing more important than protecting the unborn. That's just a blanket statement. I don't even know what could possibly be more important in our country, a bigger problem that we're having than protecting the unborn. So I hope conservatives don't push Donald Trump to, if Donald Trump has any sway in this, to go towards ending birthright citizenship. I would much rather have birthright citizenship and save millions upon millions of lives every year. It's exciting to see how this will shake up in court. As for the other two Supreme Court rulings, it's not the only one. There are a few, but there's two more that were really impactful this week, and they'll absolutely have massive impacts on your daily life. The Supreme Court ruled that parents could opt kids out of LGBTQ propaganda in schools. How is that already not a thing? I don't know. I think a lot of people probably already thought that was a thing. In some states it is. In this case, Maryland was suing basically a family for trying to opt out of LGBTQ books. Justice Alito, who wrote the concurring opinion, basically just said what we all know, which is that the state does not get to determine a child's education. This is something that liberals do not understand. Conservatives understand this. When you look at the education of a child, who has the responsibility? It is the parent. The parent. If you abdicate some, like arithmetic, science, English, if you abdicate some of that to the state, you can do that, but you still retain the overall right to it. You can withdraw that at any point if you want to. That's the conservative perspective. But from the liberal perspective, that's not the case. It is the state has an objective moral duty to educate the children. And at first glance, that's not a horrible thought. I mean, I think for, the true liberals and not the progressives, the idea, again, is that we're trying to help educate people. However, the problem with that is when you give that right to the state, they can do crazy things like put LGBTQ plus propaganda in state schools. Again, the state does not get to determine a child's education. The parents do. We know this. And parents should be able to opt out of anything they want to for either religious or educational reasons. This is obviously huge for parents who can't afford to send their kids to private schools. A lot of people are wanting to do that now, especially on the conservative side, because they don't trust what's going on in public schools. But the reality is it's extremely expensive to do that. And so now with this court filing and the Supreme Court ruling, it's not going to be an option anymore for schools to essentially force your kid to be propagandized. In that same vein, the Supreme Court also ruled that states could ban teenagers from seeing porn and require adult websites to verify ID. This was something in Texas, basically a free speech case. Adult content, they ruled, is not protected speech under the First Amendment, as the conservative justices argued in the concurring opinion. Obviously, that's a very good thing. Overall, though, you have to ask yourself, what do these rulings mean? And this is what's interesting about this, is all three of those rulings protect kids. For whatever reason, that was kind of the theme among all of this, is what the conservative justices were trying to show the Democrat ones, because again, the Democrat appointed justices voted against the children on all three of these cases. The 6 conservatives went against the 3 liberals every single time. I think we cannot forget that when it comes to the elections, because sometimes we might disagree with the Republican Party or certain leaders. I think a lot of Republicans are kind of attuned to the sense that the Republican Party is not perfect in a way that Democrats are not, and we should not idolize the Republican Party. I agree with that, and I think we should be open to, voting for people who are independent at times. However, at the end of the day, Democrat appointed justices leave kids to the whims of the LGBTQ propaganda and abortion. They've proven this in this. So again, we have to think about that when it comes to elections. Thank goodness Trump won in 2017 so that all 3 of these results would come down the way they did. The left is a cult, guys. I talk all about it in my book, A New Cult. I share some crazy stories, some stuff that I uncovered as I did my research. I think you'll have a great time reading it. Go check it out. Total tragedy in Idaho this week. I don't usually comment on national tragedies on the show. However, I do live close to Idaho. I have family in Idaho, and I think that everybody needs to know about the crazy attacks on law enforcement that we're having in the country right now. It is a problem. If you haven't heard, 2 Coeur d'Alene firemen were murdered, and 1 is in critical condition right now. Essentially what happened was there was a shooter who called these firemen in. He started a brush fire and waited for them to come and ambush them. And so, again, local police responded to defend the firemen. However, the 2 had already passed away, and 1 was critically injured before the policeman could take down the gunman. There was a sniper rifle next to him when they found him. It's a 20-year-old kid. We know his name. I'm not going to say it on the show. We're not 100% sure if police took his life or if the gunman took his own life. We're not sure. The details are pretty limited right now. However, we do know that police used the signal because a young man called in on the fire. He started the fire, then called it in, and they used that signal to track him down ultimately. So I want to take the partisanship out of it, and that's all we know, by the way. We don't know anything else at this point. And because of that, I want to take the partisanship out for just a second. We don't know anything about this boy. We don't know his political, his allegiances, the things that he talks about. He has no manifesto that we're aware of. And there are tons of people online right now that are going into the political accusations and the partisanship. And I don't want to do that. I think that's awful. What does need to be talked about, though, is the wave of anti-law enforcement. It's been a huge problem in this country for honestly a very long time, but I do feel that we're in this new age where it's happening more and more. I mean, you can go back to the Black Panthers in the 80s that hated law enforcement and did a lot of harm to them. The Ferguson riots during Obama, obviously the BLM riots that were not that long ago, and then the ICE riots that were just a few weeks ago. All of those are attacks on law enforcement, and it's horrible. It has to stop. I think part of how that happens is politicians are bringing, and again, this isn't partisan, it's not partisan, but there are politicians that bring up not supporting law enforcement, in fact, actively trying to work against them. I think that's horrible. I'm thinking of a few in particular right now, and I'm sure you could as well. We have to crucify them online. And I mean that super literally. We've got to go in and they should be impeached if they're saying that kind of rhetoric against law enforcement. It's just that simple. People should not put up with it. I think Republicans could go a lot harder on Democrats. I think Democrats could go a lot harder on Republicans. I'm talking about everybody. Republicans can go harder on Republicans. Democrats can go harder on Democrats. People need to just oust those leaders altogether. If they're going to fight against law enforcement, there's no place for it. And I think the FBI should be at every door of people who make remotely dangerous comments about law enforcement online. That's just how it is. I'm sorry. I love free speech. Free speech is important, but there is no free speech for people who make violent threats to the law enforcement of this country. One of my favorite things about the show is being able to interact with you guys, and that is why I've created my new Substack. It's a weekly newsletter where I talk directly to you, and you're able to actually do live Q&As with me, bounce political ideas off each other, completely free to you. Go check it out right now. The link is in the description below. Thank you so much for watching this video, everybody. Please like the video and subscribe to my channel so other great patriots like yourselves will see it. And you can tune in every weekday at 6 p.m. Eastern for the live show, or take a look at another video right here.